Hello, everybody. Me and Charlie are welcoming you to today's video where we get really serious and talk about how to end the war in Ukraine. In the previous two videos of this philosophy and strategy series, I argued that the war in Ukraine cannot be understood, let alone resolved, without correcting a fundamental error of judgment. In Ignorance Fuels Conflict, War Without Judgment, I showed how cause and effect were inverted in Ukraine from Maidan to the outbreak of the war. And in Unprovoked, the lie of Russian aggression, I applied classical strategic reasoning to explain why war never emerges in isolation and why the dominant narrative surrounding Ukraine fails the test of causality. Today, in this third and final part of the trilogy on Ukraine and peace, I turn to the decisive question: how can this war end? Not emotionally, not in terms of wishful thinking, but realistically. What follows is not a list of tactical fixes, but a normative strategic framework providing the conditions without which no peace arrangement can endure. If you look at current Western peace initiatives, from President Trump's 28-point plan to the counterproposal of the so called coalition of the willing, they revolve around buffer zones, peacekeeping forces, and long term military guarantees. But these proposals misunderstand the nature of the conflict, as I laid out in the previous two videos. If Western elites continue to ignore this reality, one of two outcomes will follow. Either the war will continue until Ukraine is defeated, or any peace settlement will remain temporary and collapse sooner or later. Peace initiatives built on false causality narratives inevitably reproduce the dynamics that led to war in the first place. When Western governments now speak of peace, what we encounter is the illusion of militarized peace. They're talking more weapons, more troops, more forward deployment, more deterrence. In essence, nothing really has changed. But this is not peace planning. It is the continuation of war by bureaucratic means. Militarization did not prevent this conflict. As I made clear in the previous videos, it was one of its enabling conditions. To believe now that the same logic can produce stability is not really strategic thinking. It is repetition of the old patterns. And in our context, it will lead to further escalation. Now, why do buffer zones and peacekeepers fail? They are unnecessary. And let me explain why they will fail. Ukraine does not require protection from Russia as long as it abandons its hostile posture and ends the suppression of Russian minorities, language, and culture within their borders. Russia, in turn, does not require protection from Ukraine as long as Ukraine rejects being instrumentalized as a forward military platform for Western expansion and abandons the extension of hostile military infrastructure toward Russia's immediate frontier. In practical terms, that means for Ukraine no NATO membership, no bloc alignment, no role as a military outpost. So, what numerous NATO and EU representatives still demand for Ukraine is incompatible with a sound peace agreement. They forget that a nation's liberty in arranging its security policy is restricted by their geostrategic environment and the legitimate security concerns of other nations, particularly of their own neighbors. This axiom for national security was laid down as the principle of indivisible security. For instance, in the Charter of Paris for a new Europe in 1990, but also in the Istanbul Charter for European Security in 1999. So, in their attempt to prop up the corrupt regime in Kiev, they even deny the principles that they invented and gave themselves. To build peace on false strategic premise can never succeed, and no number of peacekeepers can compensate for such a premise. I know that many of you have military or strategic backgrounds. I'm curious how your experience aligns with my theory. Let me know in the comments. Now, given this reality, the only viable path to lasting peace lies in sovereignty through restraint, as I would like to call it. It is neutrality, but neutrality not in the strict sense of international treaty law, nor a regime comparable to Switzerland or Cold War Austria. I understand neutrality for Ukraine as a policy declaration of strategic orientation, a sovereign decision by Ukraine not to join any military alliance, not to function as a forward military platform in a great power confrontation, but rather function as a bridge of transfer and understanding. Comprehended this way, neutrality is not weakness. It is, in my view, the only solid foundation for stability, while at the same time giving Ukraine more or less full leeway on the world stage, just short of joining the Western military alliance. But strategic orientation alone is not sufficient. A durable peace also requires internal political renewal in Ukraine. Political pluralism, linguistic and religious rights, and inclusive governance as prerequisites for legitimacy and reconciliation. In it, the feasibility of these conditions ultimately depends on the presence of political leadership in Ukraine capable of acting beyond wartime identity, external dependency, and existential hostility, and of engaging credibly with both Western partners and the Russian Federation. Pending the establishment of stable political conditions and a legitimate, inclusive government in Kiev, territories currently under Russian control would require interim administrative arrangements designed to prevent renewed violence and political coercion. These arrangements should be understood as provisional and conditional, not as a final determination of status. Their purpose would be to enable the creation of conditions under which internationally supervised elections or referenda could be conducted freely and without intimidation. In addition, all parties must acknowledge that sovereignty operates within geopolitical limits and that security cannot be achieved, as already said, at the expense of another nation's security. A sustainable settlement therefore requires a formalized framework of mutual restraint between Russia and the Western states, potentially in the form of a verifiable non attack or non aggression agreement grounded in reciprocity and transparency. In closing, let me say that the tragedy of Ukraine is not that peace was impossible. It is that peace was dismissed and missed because ideology replaced judgment and moral posturing replaced the proper attribution of responsibility. Politics, once stripped of intellectual seriousness, becomes incapable of recognizing limits. And without limits, power produces destruction rather than order. This is why my trilogy has argued 3 points. First, bad judgment and inverted causality generate war. Second, false causality produces false responsibilities. And third, it causes demonization and escalation. For Ukraine, before the war, and even more so now, lasting peace would require restraint and neutrality grounded in strategic reality. Peace will certainly not come in a lasting form from victory fantasies or endless militarization. It will come only when causality, proper causality, is restored, strategic realities are acknowledged, and restraint is understood not as submission, but as a sovereign choice. I'm Dr. Edwin Mitsevsky, and this is At Stake. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you on other subjects that we will discuss. Take care and God bless.